literally thousands more will hear their voice. So
Right.
until you're ready,
Thanks.
they will go.
You bet. Well, we're rolling, so we can hear you if you speak up, and it'll be a little jostle because I'm going to be setting up the tripod, but don't let me hold you up. Appreciate it.
So, so we're a small enough group that what I'd like to do is we're going to do a quick go round. Please tell us, Daniel and myself, your name, where you're from, and then if you're already involved or engaged with Movement. And there's plenty of time for more substantive conversation and back and forth, but just really a short introduction. Your name, where you're from, if you're already involved in Movement. And after those introductions, I'm going to do kind of a very short framing presentation about really what corporate personhood is and why we believe this is the linchpin for health, the nonviolent revolution. And then Daniel will actually do and here's what we are actually doing, here's our strategy, here's the ways that you can touch in, and then we got plenty of time for open conversation. Does that make sense?
Cool.
And so, as is my want, let's go to the left for introduction.
My name is Kathy. I'm from Lawrence, Michigan, and I'm not currently.
Excuse me. Yeah, up a little.
I'm a little deaf of hearing, so either you got to speak louder or we maybe move in closer.
Move in closer, please.
Let's move in closer.
Do that.
Speak a lot louder because there's a distance,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
let's get in a little closer.
This is going to be tough.
Can we fill that gap, please?
I may have to stay back. Maybe I can put this. I know what I'll do.
Sure.
That works fine. This is cool.
Thank you.
My name's Kathy. I'm from Lawrence, Michigan, and I'm not currently involved with Move to Amend.
Where's Lawrence?
I'll do the mid. Halfway between Benton Harbor and Kalamazoo.
Cool.
You want to introduce yourself? This is my son, David.
Oh, hey. Cool. Yeah. My name's Dan, and I'm from Occupy Muskegon, and that's right across from Milwaukee on Lake Michigan. Yep. And so I think I answered your question, right? Who I am and where I'm from, what we're up to. Okay, good. Glad to be
Are
here.
you involved in Move to Amend at this?
I have a pin here, and that's my first tangible step.
Okay.
Good. Okay,
Thanks,
cool.
Dan.
Yes, sir.
I'm Sati. I'm from New York and New Delhi. And, I have contributed $5, not too much, to Move to Amend. I support it, but I have some questions. I want to understand it better.
I'm Jasmine. I'm a college student here at Western, and I'm just here to learn about
Cool.
some of the stuff.
What's your name?
Jasmine.
My name is Jamie Canfield. I'm from Bradenton, Florida. Part of the original Occupy group there. We started in September of, was it 11 when it started? I am the youngest of the group, so which you can imagine it's a pretty old-timers.
No, I am.
We know about Move to Amend. A lot of us are supporters of it. We've never had a direct action communication with Move to Amend. I don't think you and I talked about it, but we are very much supportive of it.
Hi, I'm Mark Swallow. I'm from Occupy Raleigh. I've not been involved with Move to Amend, but we did work with our Raleigh City Council to have them oppose corporate personhood that was voted by the Supreme Court.
Cool.
Okay, come on in.
I'm Ron Roper from Occupy Grand Rapids.
Oh, yeah.
And what was the second thing you wanted?
If you're already currently involved in Move to Amend in some way or somehow.
It comes into my email since you came to Grand Rapids, and I don't know when to get to it.
I'm Daniel Lee, part of the Nashville leadership team at Move to Amend, and I started with Move to Amend Los Angeles, where I was co-chair.
So, as I said, what I'm going to do now is just a framing exercise to really understand what corporate personhood is. But before I do this, I'm going to just ask could anybody in literally 2 to 3 sentences say what you think corporate personhood is. And you can just do this popcorn style, which means you just pop off if you don't have to raise your hand. But if somebody asks you, what is corporate personhood, you would say?
Corporations are treated like people in our country.
Anybody else?
The extremely bizarre notion that corporations are entitled to the same rights and freedoms as human beings.
Right. And so, great job, because Mark actually said it in a nutshell. Kathy added to it and I actually very much like the adjective, the bizarre notion. And secondly, I see your hand, Ron, but the bizarre notion that corporations are entitled to the same freedoms and rights. So she added something to it. Ron?
I'd say the deliberate attempt by corporations now to claim for themselves the rights that our founders only intended for human beings as a cover for wickedness and greed.
So, and now Ron is bringing in the idea of the founding, and which is sort of an interesting part. And I'm going to invite you to join us in the circle if you'd like to actually be with us.
Yeah.
Is that a biter?
No, not at all. He's a lover.
And do you want to, what everybody did was introduce themselves by name, where you're from, and if you're already currently involved in Move to Amend, and if so, how?
My name's Kristen, and I live in Kalamazoo, and I actually work at the university here.
Cool.
And I started a petition a few years ago to get money out of politics, and then I found about you and signed your petition. But anyway, it's the issue I'm the most passionate about.
Right on.
Cool.
So, it's always interesting for me to actually, to ask that question around how people would describe it, because I want to be clear that corporate personhood is a shorthand to try to capture the dense, bizarre idea that under our legal system, and whoever said legal system, that a corporation must be treated as if it were a person with inherent and alienable constitutional rights. Now that is a crazy idea, and what we're going to do in this workshop is just to unpack it a little bit and give people an opportunity to really understand it. And I've already mentioned once, and others did, the law, and somebody else mentioned the founders, so it entices me to ask you, since we're talking about the law, what is the supreme law of the land in the United States of America?
Constitution.
What'd you say?
Constitution.
Okay.
The U.S. Constitution. Now, how many people have heard that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land? If you haven't, that's okay, but if you've heard it, raise your hand. So, all right, that's always kind of a gut check moment around just how much civics, basic civics, people have, because honestly, there are many people who don't know that. And so if that's where we start, then that's how we start. But so folks are comfortable with the idea that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, right? At least in this circle. So it behooves us to ask then, well, how many of you have read the Constitution? Please come and join us.
Yeah.
All right. So lots of people have read it.
Expand a little bit so we're a little more penetrable.
Yeah. Yes, let's do that. So Kathy, if you want to come over, Jacob. And I will tell you from and sir, you want to share your name and where you're from?
John from Occupy Chicago.
Hey.
All right. We got Chicago in the house. Welcome, John. So the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. I'll tell you, when you read that document in its entirety, not just individual words, right? Obviously, you have to read individual words to understand something. But if you look at it as a system, my mama taught me, if you want to ever understand something, you have to see how it relates to everything else. Like you have to understand systems to actually understand things. When you look at the legal system in the U.S. Constitution, I'll tell you, when you read that document that way, you'll see two actors or two big concepts at play. The first concept is the most important concept. In fact, it's so important it's the first three words.
Oh yeah, good, cool.
Those are hallowed words in this country, and they should be. See, we the people come together to create the second concept, which is government. Saying it this way, we the people create government. Government is dependent upon us. We create it. That's a very powerful idea. We the people in this framework are understood to be free and sovereign. Sovereign means the authority to rule, not the... And that's because before the Constitution and the Revolution, there was another sovereign. Who was the sovereign then? The king. King George III. The king isn't sovereign anymore in this document. We kicked his butt out, right? But check this out. I didn't write sovereign underneath government because government isn't sovereign either. Government doesn't have the authority to rule over us. Remember, government is dependent upon us. Actually, government is supposed to be subordinate and accountable. Government is subordinate to whom? We the people. Government is accountable to whom? We the people. That's got a ring to it, doesn't it? I kind of like how that's going. So we the people are free and sovereign because we the people have rights. Government does not have rights. Government has duties. And as a lawyer, I want to stop for a moment and underscore, if I have the right to do something, it means I can do it. And I don't need anybody's permission. I don't need government's permission, local, state, or federal. If you have the right to do something, it means you can do it. And not only do I not need advance permission, but if government tries to infringe upon my ability to exercise my rights, government is wrong, not me. And under this framework of the supreme law, I should be able to go into court to argue to overturn any such law.
That's what our Constitution is saying. That's what you're saying.
This is how it is supposed to operate, is what I'm saying. So, rights, the Constitution doesn't create those rights. The Constitution recognizes those rights because those rights are understood to be inherent and unalienable. What does that mean?
Inherent means you inherit it. It passes on from generation to generation.
Well, it's not inherent, it's inherent with an N.
It's something you have simply by virtue of being a human being.
Give me one of those.
I can hear that.
Say it again.
It's something you have simply by virtue of being a human being.
Inherent. I-N-H-E-R-E-N-T. Inherent. It's all good. Inherent. If you have an inherent right, it means that right is a part of your quality. As surely as your beating heart. Right? As surely as like you exist, therefore rights are a part of you. Sometimes in some political philosophical traditions they're called natural rights because they just exist naturally. They are not dependent upon government and structures. And any government that does not recognize those, according to this philosophical bent, the government is itself illegitimate if it doesn't. Duties is exactly the opposite. Duties are responsibilities. And I want to be clear, government never has rights over the people. Government only has duties to the people, responsibilities to the people. And where do those duties come from? Well, remember, all power resides with the people. Power to the people is not just a Black Panther Party chant, although it was. It's also the understanding of every revolutionary movement that's trying to challenge illegitimate power. See, we the people hold all the political power, right? But that gives me an opportunity to ask, do we have anybody from here in Kalamazoo in our presence?
We did.
Yeah, so what's the population more or less of Kalamazoo, Michigan?
I don't know, I think it's like about, well, with the students, we have 25,000 students on campus, so it varies throughout the year, but maybe 60,000?
60,000. So I will celebrate that 60,000 people in Kalamazoo, Michigan hold all the political power. But I'll tell you this, I don't want to go to a meeting of 60,000 people where we decide where should stop signs go here. Mm-hmm. And I like political meetings. I don't want to go to that one. Right? Can you imagine? Now imagine how many in Michigan?
I don't know.
12 million?
Is it that many? Sounds about right.
The point is, yes, we the people hold all the political power in any jurisdiction in which we live, but we wisely delegate a certain amount of our power to government. Do we delegate all our power to government? Hey, wait for that. We the people delegate a certain amount of our power to government. We don't delegate all our power to government. Government is limited in its power to perform the duties that we have already told them to do. That's what limited government means. For that phrase, maybe. Government is limited in its power to perform the duties that we, the people, have already said. I want to invite you, we've all just done a quick introduction. Could you say your name, where you're from, and if you're already involved in the Move to Amend effort?
I'm Ted with Occupy Chicago,
Good.
and I'm not involved specifically with the Move to Amend thing. Is this a talk on the people asserting that? Okay, corporate.
Is this where,
Cool.
Is this where you want to be?
Cool, yeah.
All right, welcome, Ted.
Thanks.
So, we the people delegate a certain amount of power to government so that government can perform some of the duties that we have told them to do. Government has no other legitimate power. And how does government perform those duties? They write laws in the public interest, or the public policy, let's say. Now, there's going to be debate on what that public policy is, right? And that's as it should be. But I think that we've forgotten that that debate is supposed to be civil discussion and discourse and debate. I think we've lost something in this country because today we've been trained to think, and frankly I think it's because of the two-party system, to trained to think yes, no, this kind of binary kind of thing, right? So I will just tell you, I think that the two-party system is part of the problem, frankly, that we've got here around what public policy is. But I want to be clear about something. Whether we agree or disagree with any public policy, if it has gone through a legitimate political process, that's the public policy. But I want to remind you, the one thing that no public law can ever do is to violate the private rights of the people who live there. Remember, we already talked Jasmine, if you've got inherent rights, then your rights are not dependent upon a vote of the people, right? And that makes sense, right? So the beauty of the United States constitutional framework, at least as it's supposed to operate, is that our individual civil rights are supposed to be protected, even as we create a process for public communitarian creation of public policy. And the one thing that no public policy can ever do is to violate the private rights of the people who live there. Right? Isn't that brilliant? I mean, isn't this beautiful? Well, we should try that in this country.
Yeah.
What about
This would
that?
totally work.
No
Yes.
idea.
I don't think it's brilliant because I think that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is something that needs to be addressed, because if the pursuit of happiness as an individual disrupts the public benefit or the public health, then it needs to be addressed.
Okay, so first of all, the phrase that you just popped off is from the Declaration of Independence. It's not from the Constitution. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. But
Okay.
And it doesn't say pursuit of happiness at all costs,
right,
at
and
the
so
expense of everyone else.
I'm going to try to keep us
Okay.
into
I went off.
yes, that's right.
Moreover, it would distinguish the limited number of inherent inalienable rights from a lot of other rights that aren't established that way, and that might be the case.
Right,
And today, a lot of the public discussion and controversy is over what's a right and what's the basis of it. Aside from these, of course, if we can link it to these inherent rights, then presumably we've got to protect it, but that can be employed for something else as well.
So I just wanted, yes, go ahead.
Okay, with everything below the U.S. Constitution, the delegate,
The what?
the delegate, I think they're wrong. I agree with you having, 13 million people or whatever trying to get together. But we've relinquished too much of our power.
Okay.
That don't really are out for themselves in the two-party system.
I'm going to let Daniel, whenever we turn it over to Move to Men, I'm going to finish up though just the framing to make sure that we at least understand the concept. Because I actually think this idea of individual rights and yet public policy and communitarian policy making, but the public policies can't violate individual rights, at the core, I think that's a brilliant concept. The thing is, we've never actually tried it in this country.
Yeah.
We've never even tried it. Because before I go 1 second further, waxing poetic about anything decent and good about the Constitution, I have to ask a timeout for somebody to tell me what year is this Constitution ratified? What year does the Constitution become the supreme law of the land?
It's 1789.
Nicely done, Ted. 1789. The reason I want the date certain for when the Constitution is ratified and becomes the supreme law of the land is so that I can ask this question. In 1789, in this country, the founding of the United States of America, who was a legal person? Who was legally part of We the People? What were their characteristics?
White male, yeah.
White men?
Landowners.
Landowners.
Good.
With property.
Yeah.
Right? So the reality is, from the founding of this country, it was racist, It was sexist. It was class oppressive built into it. You know what percentage of the adult human beings living in the newly created United States of America actually had any rights? Actually, he says 4%. Don't be so cynical, Mark. It's not 4%, it's 5%.
Well, I'll do that. Yeah.
Thanks for appreciating the joke, Jasmine. What that means, of course, is that 95% of the adults living here were not considered legal persons. I like how Howard Zinn said it. May the goddess rest his soul. Howard Zinn said, the entire history of the United States can be understood and seen as a series of struggles by actual human beings to become persons with rights under our Constitution. See how important personhood matters?
Yeah, sure.
And so now, friends, it's time to put the corporation on the board, since we're supposed to be talking about corporate personhood. But before I put the corporation on the board, very quickly, what does it take to create a corporation today? Anybody know?
$300.
In most states, it's less than that, but maybe in Michigan, it's $300. It's an application to the state, and the Secretary of State rubber stamps it and gives it to you, right? And with that, you get limited liability. Think about that for a moment. Your legal liability for your conduct is limited to only the amount of your initial investment, and any harm or abuse that might be called is too bad. Like, that's kind of an interesting phenomenon. It takes an action of state government to do it. The corporate charter, though, can describe and hold the corporation accountable. We could revoke corporate charters if there was the political will to do it. The corporate charter describes the duties of what a corporation can do. There was a time in this country when a corporation only lasted 10 years, at which point its charter usually evaporated. Some were a little bit shorter, some were a little bit longer, but every corporate charter issued for about 100 years actually was limited in time. And they could be revoked not just for, they evaporated naturally, but get this. If you ever did anything other than the specific type of business that you had asked permission for, because incorporation and limited liability is not a right, it's a privilege that the political process can only create. It takes an action of state government to issue that charter, right? And if there was a time for 100 years in this country, if you ever did any other type of business at all, you know what happened to your corporate charter? Revoked. Corporate charters were once routinely revoked for just going outside of the very tightly constrained process of what it's supposed to do. Oh, well, get this. Even if you were operating in the time period, even if you were doing the narrow thing that you were supposed to do, if you ever did anything that violated the public trust in any way, you know what happened? Revoked. Corporate charters were once revoked routinely for just acting outside the public interest. So here's a pop quiz. Can somebody name a single one of the Fortune 500 corporations that could even exist today with those restrictions?
Yeah, really.
Think about that. The entire fabric of how modern corporate society functions would not have been allowed under the framing of what is supposed to be the constitutional framework. So now that we know that it takes an action of state government to create the corporate charter, we understand that the corporate charter can be used to hold the corporation subordinate and accountable. The corporate charter describes the duties of a corporation. And a corporate charter and limited liability should only be allowed to exist in our system if it serves the public interest. It should be obvious that a corporation should be here. And now, my friends, thank you for your patience, because here comes the punchline. When the U.S. Supreme Court, in a bizarre, illegitimate exercise of their so-called power, says, we're going to tell you that a corporation, and you, all of society, must treat a corporation as it's a person with rights, it perverts the whole thing. See, corporate personhood, in a nutshell, is the idea that a corporation must be treated as if it were a person with inherent and alienable rights. And if that is true, then corporate lawyers can go into court and try to argue to overturn any law that we pass. And that means laws can be overturned that are attempting to control the most dominant institution on planet Earth today. It means that environmental protection laws can be overturned, worker safety laws can be overturned, public health laws can be overturned, and campaign finance laws can be overturned. Because I want to be clear about this. It's not just money in elections. Yes, money in elections is a problem, but it is a fundamental, profound mistake, in our opinion, to focus on just trying to get money out of elections without getting to the root cause of how corporations as instruments have hijacked our society. Because does anybody think we had a functioning democratic republic before Citizens United? So can we just agree that just trying to overturn one court decision does not actually build the social movement that we need, right?
Actually, this was occurring long before Citizens United.
Right. That's right. So yes.
Just the latest, a whole series of...
Again, this is a framing thing, and because I'm about to turn it over, but I want to make sure that what I've said at least is making sense. So any clarifying questions, and then Daniel, if you want to help answer them, but I'm also, because Daniel, I'm about to turn it over to Daniel. But if there's questions, not comments, but questions about this, Sasi.
Even an individual is not allowed or not supposed to pollute environment and infringe upon other people's rights and various other things. So even if corporations are recognized as equal, how come corporations can override all of these rights?
Because we let them is the short answer.
That's a good answer.
Yeah,
because we let them.
right.
That's a good answer.
Are there any other comments or questions? Because I do want to get this to Daniel.
Okay, but this is crucial that everybody understands what you just said. And I'd like to hear it in different words. I'd like to hear him say it.
Okay, so that's a good segue. So what I'm thinking about that. So we're going to put you on the spot.
No. The last major point.
So here's the thing. I am going to turn it over to Daniel. And I think that part of, is it? Jamie. What is interesting about Jamie's point is, see, none of you are going to say what I just said the way I said it, because you don't get to do that, because I'm David Cobb. This is how I understand it and see it and talk about it. You know, Jamie, you will talk about this in the ways that make sense to you. This is a teach in and a teach back, right? So Daniel talks about, like, we basically say the same thing, but he says different things, and I learn from him, he learns from me. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to turn it over to Daniel. And also, if you're not already participatory in Move to Amend, and you would like to be, I'm going to invite you to sign up with us. And Daniel, through the course of this conversation, might tell you a little bit about just how incredibly fast we're growing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and comrade Daniel Lee. And if you're going to sign up, please print legibly.
Okay, so I'm not exactly sure I can completely restate sort of this ending part that David went through, because I usually just don't do presentations like that. But what I will start doing is, one of the things that a lot of our affiliates ask for when they're basically trying to form an affiliate for the first time and they're going out petitioning, a lot of times they get the question that David sort of ended on: why don't we just focus on overturning Citizens United? And Citizens United only deals with money and politics. But a lot of times they're challenged mostly by people who are lawyers or people who are completely disingenuous about the real foundation of corporate personhood. And from my perspective, it's useful to be able to quote a couple cases. I really don't like writing on the boards, but I will because it's easier for people to remember. But the first case, which David might have mentioned, that sort of made this concept sort of real and solid and tactile, is Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad in 1886. And the thing to remember about that case is that it didn't really decide that corporations were people, but the court clerk in like a note, when they were basically a couple years later writing up the history of the case, basically paraphrased the judges saying something like, well, since we are all in agreement that corporations are people, we're not going to rule on that in this case, because the case was actually a double taxation case. I think Southern Pacific Railroad was being taxed by the state and the federal government for some fence post along the railroad. It was sort of like Citizens United. Citizens United could have been ruled in an incredibly narrow way, but instead, because, and this is arguable, but if you know anything about the Powell Memo, you know for about the last 30 years there's been this push by groups like ALEC and other business-friendly groups to wedge their way not only into government but more solidly into our Constitution. But the original case is Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, 1886. You don't really need to know the specifics, but that's the case where they basically decided that corporations are people. And another good thing to know is the 14th Amendment, which was, basically passed to protect freed slaves. But between, I think it's like 1886, well actually between the time it was passed up until the Santa Clara case, it was mostly used by corporations. Not successfully until the Santa Clara case, but more often than not, that law, which was passed to, protect freed slaves, and 13, 14, 15 to, protect the rights of African American people, was used by corporations. But Santa Clara County, 1886, is the first case to remember, and it's basically corporations and people. The next important case, in terms of move to amends thinking, is Buckley versus Vallejo, which was a case in 1976 where the Supreme Court basically ruled that money equals the same as free speech, and as such, you cannot limit a person's free speech for political purposes and things like that. What that ruling also did, and it was mostly applied to independent expenditures, which are expenditures that people do not give directly to the candidate, but they're like advocacy ads that, like Swift Boat, Veterans for Justice would do. Like they don't pay it directly to the candidate, but they can buy as many ads as they want, and you can't put a limit on that. What that case also ruled was that if you are an independently wealthy person, you can spend as much money as you want on your own campaign, which is sort of a perversion if you just want to get into politics for the people. But basically, that's where the second part of our amendment comes from. Money equaling free speech is a perversion. And you need both of those cases, and that was Buckley. You need both of those cases to form the foundation that the precedent that the Supreme Court justices used in 2010 to pass Citizens United. So, because they basically ruled, since corporations are people, which was established in 1886, and money is speech, then we cannot put any limits on the amount of money that corporations can spend in elections. Which is why, all of these 501c4s have popped up since then, and our rich billionaires like Sheldon Adelson and people like that basically give as much money as they want and funnel it through those 501c4s and then give those to candidates. And that's sort of my basic explanation of corporate personhood and why we do what we do. What I was really more going to talk about was our strategy about how to get there. I wanted to actually start with a quote that I thought about when me and David and a couple other people were talking last night that sort of exemplifies our strategy. And it's really short, but it's basically, the greatest mistake of the movement has been trying to organize the sleeping people around specific goals. You have to wake the people up first, then you get action. And that's from Malcolm X, just from one of his speeches. And that's sort of what our strategy from the start has been. A lot of times, and I'll just say, Move to Amend started with David and a few people actually getting together prior to Citizens United. They saw the case coming down the track line, and with the history of the Supreme Court, especially the recent history from Bush versus Gore on, but seriously, the entire history of the Supreme Court is sort of supporting corporate and business interests. We are taught the opposite, but eventually we all wake up. But David and a number of other colleagues saw the case coming down the pike and met to think about, well, what are we going to do about this? Like, is this an opportunity to wake people up? Because there are a lot of groups that have been doing anti-corporate organizing and activism for decades before Move to Amend started. But this was a pre-Move to Amend meeting. Move to Amend actually launched, I think, the day of the decision. And at that point, it was just a website where people could sign up, and we weren't really sure what was going to happen, right? Like, is this going to do something, and what are we going to do if it does? Right now, before I get into most of our strategy, I just want to say we have about 160 affiliates across the country, and we have about 306,000 people either signed up to support or actively work with us. Last year we did...
How much, I'm sorry?
306,000.
360,000?
306. Last year we did about 7 Move to Ammend convergences, and those convergences were basically designed to give our affiliates and a lot of people who are already active deeper organizing training. And one of our real focuses last year was trying to centralize both race and other forms of oppression and all of the type of organizing that we do. Because as David stated, at the beginning of our country, almost everyone was excluded. So if we get the chance to amend the Constitution or, God forbid, rewrite the Constitution, we'd like to include as many people as possible. Now,
All people, actually.
well, I mean, there are a couple people I don't want to work with.
So you all think then that amending the Constitution is the way to get us?
Well, we think amending the Constitution is a tactic that will take us one step towards bringing real democracy to the United States. One of the things that a lot of us like to say, David says it, Jerome, Ash, who also goes on the road for us, if we were successful and we got this amendment tomorrow, nothing would change.
What is the amendment?
The amendment basically says there's legalese, but it basically has 2 points. Corporations are not people, and money is not free speech. Those are the basics. But if we successfully lobbied Congress and got the amendment passed tomorrow, nothing would change because the culture hasn't changed because there wasn't a movement there to support it. One of the things that we like to reference is, as I mentioned, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which were supposed to guarantee the rights of African Americans and freed slaves shortly after the Civil War. But until a movement like the Civil Rights Movement, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, those rights were nowhere near a reality. That's why we try to shy away from a lot of DC-based groups and like the nonprofit industrial complex, because a lot of times they're just focused on a congressional win. And a congressional win without a real culture shift and without education, and what I tried to reference in that quote from Malcolm X, without really waking people up, isn't really going to do anything. So we see ourselves more as part of a worldwide democracy movement, and those are popping up everywhere. Iceland actually recently rewrote their entire constitution. Yeah. They're a much smaller country, but if they can do it, we can do it.
Yep. Nonprofit industrial complex, you just find that over.
The nonprofit industrial complex is, and this is my personal definition, a lot of people have different ones.
I like to leave it to my imagination,
but it's basically, there are a lot of groups that were formed with good intentions and by good people to do good work, but once they make certain connections within DC, with either the Democratic or the Republican Party, instead of focusing on the good work that they were created for, they basically focus on their own survival.
Lobbying, among other things.
Well, as an example, a lot of people get, like a few years ago, the Susan Komen organization was revealed to, I think, use about 75% of their money basically for overhead, and people thought it was like a scandal. It's like, oh my God, like they don't even use all of the money that we get for charity. But if you actually did an audit of most of the nonprofits in the DC area, that's common. And it's a bad thing, and it's something that's there because they have to lobby people so hard, because they have to, treat people to dinner and this and that. But they have the type of real work that they're able to do is limited because they're just focused on their own survival more than anything else.
There's a limited number of nonprofits that are doing that.
That's most nonprofits.
most of the hundreds of thousands of nonprofit organizations in this country.
In the DC area.
The DC area. That is a limited number.
Well, I don't
Those
want
we're trying to.
I don't want to get sidetracked into that
Okay.
conversation, but I answered your question.
That's
So,
good.
I'm gonna move on. So I wanted to first talk about our first strategy when we started to try to wake people up. In a lot of different municipalities, like where I'm from in Los Angeles, we've passed basically city council or county resolutions. And a lot of times these resolutions involve both reaching out to our communities to try to communicate why corporate personhood should matter to them for whatever particular issue silo, and then interacting with our local governments to tell them why this is important. And although we think that is a good tactic, what we started out trying to get people to do more are ballot initiatives. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do ballot initiatives is because they give you the opportunity to speak to people twice. One, when you first talk to people about corporate personhood, it's sort of vague and esoteric, and they're like, well, I think corporations have too much power, but I don't know exactly what you're talking about. So if you do a ballot initiative, the first opportunity you have to talk to people is when you're gaining signatures to get on the ballot. So it gives you an opportunity to explain to people and do the research yourself about what type of corporate issues are affecting people in your county. In addition to that initial signature gathering period, you also have the opportunity to educate people after it's on the ballot, just by going out and canvassing and doing petitions. And then once it's actually on the ballot, they see it again. Like, one of the reasons that we like doing ballot initiatives is that even if you get whatever number of thousand people to sign up in order to get on the ballot, and even if you go out canvassing after that, there are a whole lot of people that you're going to miss. But say you get to like 40% of the voting electorate, everyone else is going to see it on election day, and that's just one more step towards education. And that's the preferred way that we like a lot of our new affiliates to go about both building their membership and getting the word out about Move to Ammend. Now, we did the opposite thing in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is huge, and at the time, we were pretty sure that we could not actually get something that was citizen generated on the ballot. And we basically resigned ourselves to doing a ballot initiative maybe like 5 years down the road, just because Los Angeles is a large place. So what we started doing, Los Angeles has this neighborhood council system. We have about 96 different neighborhood councils, which are officially recognized parts of the city. So we went to a neighborhood council that one of our LA members was a part of, and we did a Move to Ammend presentation, and we tried to get them to endorse it. Now, this is on the west side of Los Angeles. It was the first time, but we thought it was going to be sort of a cakewalk. There are 14 people in this neighborhood council. One of the people was a member of our affiliate. We were like, yeah, whatever. It ended up being a really long, cantankerous debate with a lot of people talking about, well, the U.S. was never a democracy. We've always been a republic, and just getting down into incredible minutiae. But eventually, it passed. Prior to this, I think this was one of the first times a group like ours actually went to the neighborhood council. The city attorney contacted the neighborhood council. They never contacted the neighborhood council before, or any other neighborhood council for this type of issue, and had to get clearance from them. And as a result of that city attorney contact and a result of us passing it through the neighborhood council, one of our city council members at the time, Eric Garcetti, actually introduced a similar resolution to the full city council. The only problem with the resolution is that it only focused on Citizens United. So what we did in LA was we lobbied city council in a sub-council meeting to strengthen the language until it was as strong as the Move to Ammend language, which basically says corporations are not people and money is not speech. And then we had to take it to the entire city council for a vote there. So what we did then, and I just want to tell our story real quick just to give a sense of well, I'll say later. But we ended up reaching out to all of the groups that we'd like other people around the country to reach out to make connections within their community. We reached out to the LA County Federation of Labor, Screen Actors Guild, Directors Guild, Green Party, Move On, Progressive Democrats, libertarian groups, and we formed a huge coalition. So by the time we had the city council vote, there were about 650, 700 of us there. We had about 200 or 300 people sign up for public comment. Only about 100 actually got to comment, and it was passed unanimously. And I only tell that story because it harkens back to what I wanted to try to convey in the Malcolm X quote. Both ballot initiatives, when you win, and we've won every time we put it on the ballot 28 times, and resolutions, when you have to do deep organizing in your community, are a first step in giving people a sense that maybe we can actually do something about this. Because one of the things that I heard the most in our LA group at the time was a huge mixture of Occupy LA and Move to Amend LA and all the Move On groups in the county. But by and large, partially because of Occupy, young and old, this was the first time anyone had really tried to engage either with activism or with their government. And one of the things that's most lacking in our nation as a whole is a belief that we can do something about everything that's wrong.
Right.
Like, if you ask people, do corporations have too much power? They're like, of course they do. Do you ask people, is the government spending money in the wrong place? Should we get out of the wars? Everybody completely agrees. But what they don't believe is that we can do anything about it. And that's sort of what these type of things, like a resolution or a ballot initiative, is designed to do. It's an organizing activity. We know that resolutions are symbolic. The resolutions don't do anything. They educate both the citizens and our elected officials, but they aren't binding. But what they do is educate and give people belief. You had a quick question?
What year was this? When did this happen?
In December 2011 was when we went through the LA City Council.
Okay, and you said they had passed it unanimously.
Yeah, 11-0 with 2 abstentions.
And it was the general wording of corporations or not?
It was actually the first municipality. We actually got the language of our official proposed amendment to the council, and they were going to adopt one that they altered, but they ended up adopting the one that's on our website.
And have you seen any enforcement thereof?
Well, it's a resolution, so you cannot enforce it. As I was mentioning before, it was more of an organizing activity.
So it's not a law. No, it's not. It's just a resolution. What does that mean? Just a feel-good comment?
Well, my entire point of what I was saying before is that it was sort of an empowering, organizing activity. And I can talk more, and I'm going to talk more about some of the binding things that we are doing as well. You got a question?
So at the lower levels up to city council level, you had success. But if you went above that, like at the state level now, then these media start getting involved, and most of the media is...
Actually, these questions are about things that I'm going to get to, so I'm just going to cut you off and continue. So those were our initial policies and things that we tried to do to empower people to believe that they can actually make change. And as a result, so far we've passed 500 resolutions around the country. Some just moved to amend, some in conjunction with some other groups. And we've put it on the ballot 28 times, and each time it's won, usually by 70, sometimes 80%. And this is in conservative areas and liberal areas. And more people are using the language that we push more, which is the language of corporate personhood, not just about Citizens United. And more we're seeing people actually push back. I'll just share 2 more examples from Southern California. We tried to get a resolution passed in the Santa Monica City Council last year, along with the cell death resolution, which is a binding ordinance that recognizes the rights of nature, but a separate thing. But 2 groups are working on the same thing. It failed. The cell death resolution passed. This year, a couple active people in LA went to the Santa Monica City Council again to try to pass it again. After lobbying, some people switched out. And the day before, both David and I were emailed because there was a member of the Chamber of Commerce who emailed this sort of 13-page long response. We can't do this. This will be the death of free enterprise in the market and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And this was
I wish.
a bit of a surprise because when we went through the LA City Council, I mean, there were some people that we had to convince on the City Council, but there wasn't a whole lot of huge backlash. But that was almost 2 years ago. This was this year. And at this point, like I said, we're about 306,000 strong, and we have 160 affiliates, and more people know who we are. I mean, David's normally on Tom Hartman. We've been on the Young Turks. We've started working with this newer network called Pivot, which is aimed at younger people. Last year, we got a random email from the director of Talladega Nights and Anchorman, and he was just like, well, we're throwing a fundraiser for you at our house in the Hollywood Hills. If you guys would like to come, let us know. And that was seriously the email. But I only say that to say that the knowledge of what we're doing and who we are is growing. So our initial strategy was to do ballot initiatives and resolutions in separate towns. And then once we reached critical mass, try to do a statewide ballot initiative to educate the entire state, but also to see if the statewide ballot initiative would be binding and would actually count. Because at this point, about 16 states have passed some type of resolution in favor of an amendment. But they've all been different wordings, and they've all been resolutions. What we're trying to get our states where we have more affiliates to do right now is what's happening in Minnesota. Earlier this year, our We the People Amendment was introduced in Congress on February 14th by Mark Hogan of Wisconsin and Rick Nolan of Minnesota. Another version of our We the People Amendment was introduced in the Minnesota lower house, and it passed. Now, we were initially thinking that it would pass the Minnesota Senate sometime in June, but they had the votes and then the votes slipped away. But it still passed the House. And if we're lucky, it will pass the Senate. And that legislation in the Minnesota legislature is binding. That would count as one state.
But that's not that's a different type of amendment?
No, that's the exact same amendment.
Why do you call it We the People instead of...
That's the name of our amendment.
Okay.
We don't call it the Move to Amendment.
Okay.
It's the We the People amendment.
So it's the same amendment?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
So how would it be binding?
Because it's
The U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court says corporations are people.
Well, it's a binding step towards calling for an amendment.
Okay. Because it won't change
versus a resolution. Versus a resolution.
How would it?
Well, it's in order to amend the Constitution, you can either go through Congress or go through the states.
But you need to get it along the states. Right?
Exactly. So it would be one state.
I see.
That's what I'm saying.
I see.
How many are needed?
I think you need like 38.
75%. Right? 75% of the schools.
But we're getting off track. I want to just finish some of the other elements of our strategy and then open it more to questions. But as I said, we started with the resolutions and ballot initiatives. We did some research and we found out that even if we did a statewide ballot initiative, it wouldn't actually be binding, which is why we're trying to do the Minnesota strategy to actually pass it through state legislatures so that it does count on steps towards the number of states you need to call for an amendment or call for a constitutional convention, and it puts pressure on Congress. That sort of segues into something that we started this year and something that we hope to ramp up during the next primary election cycle. It's a program we call Pledge to Amend, and it's where we have our local representatives, our local affiliates, basically try to get their local and state representatives on record as to whether or not they advocate for an amendment. So we try to put pressure on them, in general, but also because people move up from local to state and to federal all the time. So if we're not going to get this amendment with the people who are currently in Congress, one of the prongs of our strategy besides the community organizing aspect, is to work on the people now before they get into Congress, especially since Alec is working on it. But that's the Pledge to Amend campaign, and that rolled out this year. And it's something that people can do whether or not they are in an affiliate, because it grows the number of state representatives who are on record. And then when we have a larger and larger list, it becomes easier and easier to convince other state representatives. Another initiative that we started this year is called the We the People Listen Project. And this goes back to more of the community organizing aspect of what we do. We're basically asking our affiliates to go out once or twice a month into either their own neighborhoods or into neighborhoods where they do not have good connections. Like a lot of the demographics of our affiliates across the country skews to people who are older, white, or retired. And it's a lot of people who have basically the time to do it. And one of the reasons that we centralized race, and we focused on that last year in our convergences, is if we only have older white people, then we're not going to win. The thing that I've been bringing up over and over again is with the results of the election last year, the first thing that the Republican Party tried to focus on was we need to reach out to people of color. We need to reach out to, well, they still say minorities. We need to reach out to people of color. And we need to reach out to people of color bad, or we're never going to win again. They recognize the shifting demographics of the country. I usually like to reference the fact that I live in LA, and LA and San Francisco have not had a racial majority for quite some time. Earlier this year, the population of California shifted, so we no longer have a racial majority. The rest of the country is going to go like that. So both from a social justice perspective and from just a strategy we want to win perspective, we want to involve as many people as possible.
About 30 minutes left.
Okay, so
I'm going to go and let everybody else know.
Okay. So part of the We the People Listen project is to get people out into communities where they don't know people and ask what they care about in the context of corporations. And for a lot of people, I know particularly in Los Angeles, where I had some Occupy LA friends who are professors or teachers, a lot of the issues going on in LA are about charter schools. And the fact that the charter schools are sucking up all the money, and public schools are being closed, but people are being moved to other public schools where the class size gets larger, and the teachers are more stressed, and certain people have an option to go to charter schools, but the charter schools can't serve everybody, and they end up draining money from, the public school coffers. And that's an issue there. But a lot of other people have environmental issues. Like we've done a lot of work in California with people who advocate for GMO labeling, and they faster and faster recognize that the issue of corporate personhood and corporate power directly affects their issue. Because if Monsanto did not have all of those rights to spend all of that money, Prop 37, which was the California proposition to label GMOs, we were winning 2 or 3 weeks before the election. Then all of the money came in from Monsanto and Coca-Cola and all of these huge companies which have been using genetically modified products for years. I usually joke and tell people, do you like Doritos? Do you like GMOs? And that money easily defeated it. But they're really easy connections that we can make with people. We also work with like a lot of anti-fracking people in California. But a lot of times you don't know what people's particular issues are until you go out and ask them. So that's what the We the People Listen project is all about. Getting people into other neighborhoods and into their own neighborhoods to find better ways to connect to the problems that people have. I'm going to take a side note and just go back and say a little bit of what we did in Los Angeles prior to the We the People Listen project. One of the things that we did, which was easy to sort of get rolling because we knew we were going to go to City Hall and we needed to do this and that, we started a speakers bureau where we took everybody who was comfortable speaking and doing public speaking and paired them up with everybody who was not. And we had everybody research the issue of corporate personhood and corporate power from the perspective of what they cared about most, which is sort of what we're trying to get from the We the People Listen project for people who are not affiliated with us. But as a result, the biggest note we had to give people was just slow down. Because a lot of people who haven't done public speaking before get really nervous the biggest thing they do is talk really fast and everyone can understand. But as a result, we had the opportunity to do that specific research into very specific areas of LA and find those connections. Because one of the things that's really hard to talk to you about was like, well, how does this affect my life? Like, people recognize that corporations have too much power, but how does helping you affect my life? So doing that research is huge. If you either have an affiliate or you want to go out and petition in your neighborhood, it paid off. One of the things that we're trying to do is work out, because, as I mentioned before, unlike the other groups that mostly focus on Citizens United, we want to say corporations are not people, money is not free speech. What we're trying to do, and work with a couple affiliates, because we did some of this research in Los Angeles, is go just by amendment and list corporate abuses based on those amendments, to give all of our affiliates more ammunition when they go out, to say why we're not just focused on money and politics, but we're focused on the whole enchilada, because it's the root of a lot of other problems. One of the last things that I'll talk about is an initiative that we sort of just started. We found out last year when we did 7 convergences, and we did one earlier this year in Portland, and we did some stuff at the Democracy Convention in Madison about a week and a half ago. But we found out that for the most part, when we tell people that we want to centralize race and oppression in our organizing, when we talk from a historical perspective, they're like, oh yeah, women didn't have the right to vote, and black people were mistreated, and the indigenous were there, but I still don't know what that has to do with corporate person. And it's been a struggle for us, even though we talk about the original founding of the Constitution and how so many people were excluded, and why we need a movement to change that. It's been a bit difficult to try to get people to connect to everything and realize that one of the reasons that it was so easy to amend the Constitution to lower the voting age was because people were dying in Vietnam, and there was a huge anti-war movement going on, and there was an energy that went beyond mere lobbying. So to communicate the specifics of movement building and the specifics of oppression, what we rolled out about a week ago is a reading series that we're doing with all of our affiliates to give deeper political education, both about oppression in general, but about past movements for amendments, both in the United States and democracy movements around the world, to give everybody a deeper education and in a broader context. Because, as I stated before, and as David probably stated while he was talking while I was out, we feel like we need a movement to win. We don't just need people to agree and, yeah, that's bad. Here, I'm going to sign your petition, or I'm going to vote for this resolution. We need a real movement that really demands it. We need people in their communities. We need people who, never thought about running for office to actually run for office and replace the assholes we have. We need a huge groundswell to get this done. But it's very hard for us to communicate that just by going around and giving talks. Like the people who have actually been able to come to the 8 convergences that we've had so far, they usually leave understanding that more. But we have 306,000 people who sort of agree with us, and we've only done 8 convergences. And like I said, we're not part of the nonprofit industrial complex, so we work on a very limited budget. So this reading program is designed to give people that deeper education in a more regimented, profound way. And the way it's going to work is a team of 3 of us from the national leadership team, and there are 12 of us on the national leadership team. Here this weekend are myself, David, and Jerome Scott, who also works with the U.S. Social Forum. I think he's downstairs. But 3 of us from the national leadership team will also do the reading with each other, and then we'll actually have conversations about everything that we go through and talk about everything within the movement context. So we're educating, hopefully, hundreds or thousands of people across the country to have a more I want to say militant, but I want to explain militant because a lot of times when people hear the word militant, they're like, oh yeah. When I say militant, I mean discipline, mindset, and goal-oriented. When you hear militant a lot, people think, oh, so you want us to throw Molotov cocktails.
What associated for it?
Militant is what I mean.
Yeah.
But we want people to have a regimented, devoted mindset, and we feel that education is the key because there's a huge swath of history of the United States that people don't know. A lot of people have read, Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States of America, but most people have not, and most people don't know who Howard Zinn is. And beyond just the people's history, there are millions of untold stories of the history of indigenous people in the United States, the Japanese internment, the Chinese people mistreated in building the railroads out west, and specifically one of the topics that we are going to cover, since, like I said, last year we chose to focus on centralizing race, is who became white when? And it's a curious question. A lot of people from certain Caucasian ethnicities, if that's even a thing, understand it if, their families still have a very long history. Because it was a long time until Irish people were white, It was a long time until Jewish people were white. Whiteness has been used as a tool to divide us for centuries. So we want to get people into that mindset of sort of togetherness. And the last thing I'll say, it's slightly off the subject, and then we'll sort of open it to more questions, is one of the other things that we're doing, and I don't know if anybody was here last night for the GA, but there was an objection raised. One of the people working with Move to Ammend in Massachusetts, Michael Ippolito, wanted NatGat basically to endorse our amendment. And for us, that would have been great, but not having it, it doesn't really matter that much, frankly. But there was an objection on the basis that some of the amendment language would possibly restrict what unions can do. And since that was a huge topic last night, I just wanted to mention it. That's not true. That's an odd interpretation which we encountered from basically two people in Massachusetts. And their way of thinking is that, well, if corporations, all corporations, and we advocate for corporations, nonprofits, and unions to not have the same rights as humans. But a lot of their argument was if unions don't have the same rights as we do, then we don't have the right to protest or affiliate or, petition our government for redress of grievances. And I just want to say right now that's a complete logical fallacy. What we're saying is organizations or artificial entities should not have the same rights as humans. Individual members of a union or a group of people from a union still have a right to protest, and our amendment would not infringe on that right in any way, shape, or form. And I say that because one of the newest members of our national leadership team is Richard Monhay, who is... David, what's Richard's title?
He is the International Vice President of Workers United /SEIU.
He's the International Vice President of Workers United /SEIU. So I mentioned that only to dispel what happened last night. We work with unions. Prior to Citizens United, a lot of unions were actually sort of in favor of it. But once it passed, and once it was clear in places like Wisconsin, that unions would not be able to even, anywhere near equal the amount of money that corporations can spend, the unions came around pretty quickly. So I just wanted to say that to dispel the notion that we are in any way anti-union. We're working with the biggest union in the country. And with that, I'll end, and I think we can open up for questions.
Thanks.
Okay, right there and then right here.
So you're saying that the language of this doesn't stop the right to unionize. What it stops is if I'm in the union, I can't give money to the campaign.
What it says is the union itself doesn't have the same rights as us. If you're in a union, you can still give the money to a campaign. It doesn't stop that at all. All right, you were next, and then
You addressed one of the objections last night. What about the other one?
what was the other one?
The other one was an expression that if this organization endorsed you, that it would be an insult to other organizations out there that are working on the same general topic.
Well, personally, I think that's ludicrous. I think, well, like I said, one, organizationally for us, the endorsement doesn't matter. We can be endorsed or not. We're going to be still doing our work. But we do like to make the distinction between us. Our national leadership team is dispersed around the country. I live in Los Angeles. Jerome Scott lives in Atlanta. David's in Eureka, though David's mostly on the road. But we have people around the country, and we like to make that distinction because a lot of the other groups that are working on constitutional reform, one, they're based in D.C., and they're basically part of the nonprofit industrial complex, and a lot of times their amendment strategies are a portion of the reason that they exist. Most of their they do other good work in other things. We're the only organization that has sort of that one purpose. And like I said, most of those other organizations, except for Free Speech for the People, advocate for amendments that only cover Citizens United. So we think, one, that we're distinct from those other organizations, but two, endorsing us is in no way an insult. One, because we are one of the only groups that has been to probably 60 or 80 occupies. I mean, I come out of Occupy LA. I was at OWS like week 3. I was in DC at Freedom Plaza and McPherson Square. I was in Chicago last year for NATO. Ashley Sanders, who's also on our leadership team, was in Occupy with DC and Utah. We have Egberto Willis from the Coffee Party. He was in Occupy in Texas. We've actually been here. And a lot of us are actually part of Occupy. A lot of those other groups don't show up. And whether or not they showed up, the thought that it would be an insult that we were endorsed, I don't follow that logic.
But whatever they're doing, in a sense, even Citizens United, you back the agenda of this is that and more, so it's an alliance.
Well, and my contention is if people want to endorse those other groups, they are free to. But let's get back to the slide. You were next, and then you.
Okay, and just to clarify, this amendment that you guys are proposing, not only would it not limit individual union members, but it also wouldn't limit individual shareholders of corporations. Any person who's just an individual person would still have all the rights of a normal person. It's just organizations that would have limits on their rights to contribute money as free speech, basically.
Well, yeah, basically.
Let me jump in because I think that if I heard the question, I think you've actually sort of merged the two. That Daniel really was, I thought, very explicit. There is having a constitutional right, and then there's money as speech. Your question merges those two together. So to answer it properly, we have to separate them. It would mean that individuals still have their inherent constitutional rights. But the money as speech issue means that local, state, or federal government can pass, because campaign finance is a political question, not a judicial one. So whether or not a person could give money in elections would be a function of what the local, state, or federal law says, not what the courts say.
Yeah, well, and I think he was mostly agreeing with us. What I was just going to say is one of the things that sometimes comes up in some of those other groups and some other people is like, well, why don't we just focus on getting money out of politics first? With the precedent that was set specifically in Buckley versus Vallejo, any public financing law or like anything like that you pass has to be voluntary because the Supreme Court rules that money is free speech. So you can't put any limits on that until you get rid of Buckley. So if you just focus on Citizens United and you think you're going to have a public financing system, you don't know anything about precedent.
My question goes back to what David was saying, that we let them go. Actually, the whole system is such that there are two things. One is court is given so much right to interpret and just do anything you feel like with whatever wordings you do. They will distort it and interpret it in their own way. Secondly, if even the people that we elect, the system of election is such that it really it gives too much power to money. I mean, the system can be modified in such a way that money doesn't have as much weight as it has in the present manner of elections. And then the structure that we create also is faulty. Benjamin Franklin, he had support of nearly 1/3 and possibly majority of the people in the constitution making body were in favor of having multi-member collective be at the top of executive only during the period when the Congress was not in session. But the power to do anything was invested in the Congress, not an individual. It's just a quirk of history that because they were tired of so many debates, they voted for, okay, we will have a single person who will be president. But so these things, a lot of these things go into straightening things out. Just to move to amend the Constitution a little bit, and I don't think it's going to cause a lot of problem. We have to be able to.
Well, that's one of the reasons that I feel like both of us said that we need a movement. And I think I mentioned before that we see amending the Constitution as a tactic towards building the type of democracy that we actually want. Even the type of democracy that you suggest, especially given our current Congress, if we just flipped it and Congress was at top and the president was in the middle, we'd still be fucked. So what we really like to focus on, and one of the reasons that we're working with the U.S. Social Forum more, is systematic change. Like you said, we need a new system. But we feel like this is the first step towards actually doing that.
Good.
And I think you had a hand?
Yeah, this is new to me. So you're saying that campaign finance reform would be void because of this law. We have to tackle this law.
Basically, and David, you can jump in if you want, but basically any type of, there were actually two challenges recently. I think there is a public financing law on the Montana books for like 120 years. And I think Montana tried to challenge Citizens United based on that law, and the Supreme Court wouldn't even hear it. So since Citizens United and Buckley were passed, any campaign finance law that is passed without amending the Constitution to get rid of these things would have to be voluntary.
Or super limited. And again, this is, and Dre, this is a good question because it's getting down to the nut of the basic thing that we have to start to wake people up to is how our system works. If you have a constitutional right, it means that you have inherent things that you can do or that you cannot be infringed upon. The corporation is an artificial entity. It only has whatever privileges that we say. That's how it should be operated. But the courts allowing them to have constitutional rights has basically made democracy illegal because we can't actually do anything real. But that's separate from money in elections and political contributions. Our position is this, that because money is not speech, it's a political question to decide how to best protect any elections, which means local people should have a process by which they can make decisions on how to protect elections. States do it, and then federal. Now, we believe that publicly funded elections, and let's just get all the money out of elections. But that's a political question. You don't have to agree with that to be part of the movement. Is that?
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to mention, I think Arizona had a pretty good
Like
law.
Arizona, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, I mean, like state laws have been stripped away because of this.
Yeah, really good, like, finance law.
Yeah, this was kind of an eye-opener for me as a lawyer, right? Amendments aren't laws. This is not a law. This is the foundation for the laws. So in order to provide a firm foundation for those laws, then we need this amendment that says corporations are not people. Therefore, all those things that have been passing about, corporate can do this, corporation can do that, would be stripped away when you change that foundation. So, for example, women have the right to vote. There's laws about how, women have to be 18, they have to be citizens, blah, blah, blah. But the amendment is what laid the foundation for women being able to vote. It superseded another amendment which said that they didn't have the right to vote, right? So you layer these things on top of each other, and that builds the foundation for the laws that are established by local, federal, local, state, and federal.
It reestablishes states' rights. Come on, everything is subject.
I don't know if that helped, but
Yeah.
Another argument in favor of what you are doing is this, that in corporations, people have power in proportion to the shares that they hold, the money that they have invested. On the other hand, in democracy, we are supposed to have one person, one vote, one equal weight. So, on the basis of that principle gets violated if corporations are considered people. I mean, speech amounts to vote. So therefore, corporations need restriction rather than recognition of being people. Because even though they are composed of people, but that composition is distorted by giving a lot of weight to the people with more investment. And so if you recognize their say as equal to the people's, then it violates one vote, one person, equal weight.
Okay, and it's interesting that you brought that up. For the purposes of the teach-backs, I just wanted to sort of write up some of the stuff that I mentioned, just to jog people's memories if anybody actually wants to take the lead on teaching back. But it's interesting that you mentioned that because there's another case coming down the line on October 8th, and it's McCutcheon versus the Federal Election Commission. And right now, corporations can give as much money as they want to 501c4s, and that money is usually used to support some candidate, some type of independent expenditure, usually like a television ad. But with the McCutcheon case, it's basically challenging the notion that limits can be put on how much a person can spend on an election, an individual directly spend to a candidate. I think right now the limit's $5,000. So if you want to spend more, you have to go through a 501c4. Yeah,
You have to go through what?
a 501c4, which was a political action committee or a super PAC.
Yeah, but
super PACs.
if you can
Let me
go
finish
through
what I'm
that.
saying, please. But like the McCutcheon case would basically strip away those limits for individuals. So if you were an individual billionaire, say you had like $60 billion, you could directly give $10 billion to whatever candidate you want if this case goes down the same way that Citizens United does. And that's coming up before the Supreme Court in October.
But even through PAC, they should not be able to.
Well, yeah. But I'm just saying this is another way that it's going to be more obvious how completely bought the entire system is.
How about
if
that?
the decision goes the 5-4 way that most of the decisions have gone.
I got here just this morning. Just a quick question. What time is it here in Michigan? My clock is 11:50, but that's probably 1 hour.
12:50.
And another really quick question. This pen GA this evening, is that a different kind of like feminine GA, or it's not a regular GA?
I'm not really sure how that's going to work.
It is a General Assembly that is facilitated by women, and it is an effort to really take the ideas of feminism and put it into practice at a General Assembly. Men are invited to participate. but it is really an effort to centralize the notion of feminism and real shared leadership, and really ask women to check our voices.
And now I have a question or a comment about this discussion here. I think the whole initiative to reform or amend the Constitution is flawed. I think, and some of us in Occupy Chicago believe that this entire representative system that we have, which is instituted by the Constitution, is out-and-out oligarchy. When you vote in a few people into office, and some of them you don't even vote into office, like the Supreme Court justices, that's the rule of the few. That's the rule of the 1%. And it won't do at all to just amend this Constitution. We have to abolish this Constitution and put in place a real democracy. And a real democracy, as far as we're concerned, is based on assemblies of ordinary people in their communities throughout the country. And the executive part of the new democratic constitution would be citizen councils made up of ordinary people filled randomly, not elected, because election gives rise to elites in office. Whereas when you fill executive offices randomly, it's literally ordinary people. That to us would be a democratic system. It's based on the Athenian democracy, the ancient Athenian democracy. So we shouldn't be, as far as we're concerned, Occupy and a real democratic movement in this country shouldn't be messing around with this Constitution at all. It should be abolishing this Constitution.
The only thing I would say, how are you going to get to abolish it? What are the steps in between? Because from our perspective, what we want is a real democracy that's not just decided by Occupy Chicago, and that's not just decided by Move to Amend, but that's just decided collectively. And what we see as a step towards achieving that democracy is either amending or rewriting our Constitution. Now, there's some people within our ranks who agree that we should rewrite the whole thing. But the steps to get there are usually where I clash with some of my fellow Occupy people, because it's fine and good to say that this is the ideal system we want, but how do we...
So my clarification, when you say we, who do you mean by we?
In what context? I said
you just said
several times.
Yeah, yes. You said what we want and what we demand. Who is the we in that statement?
Specifically right now, I'm talking about me and several other occupiers in Occupy Chicago.
Cool.
This is our program. But we're recommending this program for the democratic movement in general, Occupy in general.
Cool.
We would recommend that Occupy and radicals throughout the country adopt such a program.
Okay, thank you.
But to get back to your comment, we don't, and I don't think anybody has the exact steps to get to a real democracy. But I think this is not the way, because it gives credence to this Constitution, whereas this entire Constitution is bullshit. It's an electoral representative oligarchy, literally, okay? And it gives rise to plutocracy.
But it's what we got.
But it has to go.
You're saying a lot of things. You're saying a lot of things that I know, obviously.
All right.
But that's just my problem. I understand where you're coming from. I have a whole lot of anarchist friends, specifically in Occupy LA. But the notion that this is what we want, and we don't know how to get there. Eventually, that has to be answered.
I didn't say I don't know, or we don't know how to get there, period. The exact outline, the exact steps would have to be worked out.
Exactly.
But this to me is not one of the steps.
Okay, that's your opinion. I understand. Go ahead.
Thanks, yeah. And so I want to get to the kind of like the payoff here. And I think you've spelled it out pretty clearly. There's a lot that we could do. We agree, let's just say we agree, okay? And so now we want to follow through. What is it we should do first, or most importantly? And I think that you spelled that out. There's a lot we could do, but you see us as organizing locally, finding out what the issues are locally that are related to this, and then try to get community members involved and present this to the city council or something and get them to endorse this idea, right, and to sign on.
Well, yeah, and one of the things about getting involved locally is not just from a Move to Amend perspective, but just to get to know basically what's going on in your local community and what people care about, and what groups already exist in your community and what they're doing. Like, one of the problems that a lot of radical or progressive groups have is that there's a lot of duplication of efforts because people don't know each other.
Right.
Because everyone's trying to do vaguely the same thing, but they don't listen to each other.
Right.
That's why we want to get people out into their community. Because, you can knock on a door and someone will be like, well, I work with Cell Deaf and we're trying to do this. Or I work with, the League of Revolutionaries in my city, and we're trying to do this. Like, there's a lot of untapped potential because we don't know each other. And we see this entire process in general as collaborative. And this is our plan right now. But as I mentioned before, prior to Citizens United, there wasn't a plan. But there was an idea that an opportunity to talk about our system in a broader context would be opened up by Citizens United. So this plan that we have now is obviously going to change because hopefully more and more people will be working with us, not just listening to us.
Can I feedback? Can I continue? I agree with you 100%. And actually, I saw the Occupy group initially, and I still hope always that would be exactly what Occupy was. In my hometown, we've got people who are all about fracking. We got people all about women's rights. We got people all in their little groups all around. They're not working together. And I kind of hope that Occupy would be that, a little bit of everybody looking for democracy. And now I'm thinking that you probably got it here at least started. I don't know, man, but it sounds like a damn good thing.
Well, I mean, and I want to underscore this, and maybe David can say more. Like, this is our strategy at Move to Ammend, and this is what we're doing. But we also work with a lot of other groups. Like, as I said before, we work with a lot of Occupy groups around the country. And we work with the U.S. Social Forum. And I think a number of you were here earlier when David was talking, so maybe you can just talk a little about the Social Forum.
Very quickly, the U.S. Social Forum comes out of the World Social Forum process, which is civil society coming together to say another world is possible. That's the World Social Forum. The U.S. Social Forum says if another world is possible, another U.S. is necessary first. We got to change this country, which is the capital of empire. In the U.S. Social Forum, it is the only grouping that I'm familiar with that is not just at the table, literally led by organizations that are led by and organized people of color and queers and immigrants, women and other typically disenfranchised groups and sectors of society. I have the honor of serving on the National Planning Committee of Movement of the U.S. Social Forum. We have many members of the U.S. Social Forum are here, and the entire experience that we do collaboratively together this afternoon are all led by my comrades at the U.S. Social Forum. So that's another example. We collaborate with Occupy, we collaborate with the United States Social Forum, we collaborate, our local affiliates mostly collaborate with people on the ground. I mean, you could be able to speak to LA and all the different things that y'all have done. The point is this, that Daniel sort of invited us to really think about is, we have a plan for trying to organize people to build a democracy movement. I appreciate that Ted thinks that this is not the right strategy, to which we would say, you know what, brother, you take the high road, we'll take the low road, and we'll see who gets the island before you. Because if you end up organizing like enough people to actually
I'm with you. Yeah.
that looks coherent and real, then we'd like to talk to you.
Right.
But at this point, I've been at this for 15 years. This is the first time that I've actually felt like we're really cohering something that has actually forced us, and frankly, I want to end with this, if possible, because just as a concept. I've been working on corporate personhood and corporate constitutional rights for 15 years, more or less. It's almost always appealed only to white people, because that story only appeals to white people. We have learned to talk about this in ways that are beginning to make sense to people of color who, are organizers like Daniel. And I apologize for that logistical thing. I don't know if Daniel mentioned it. If I did, my apologies. If you did it, my apologies. But there is a 12-member national leadership team on Move to Ammend, right? We are across the country from Florida to Northern California, Maine to New York to LA, Atlanta, Texas. Like, we're everywhere, right? So geographically diverse. I'm very proud of that. We've got some younger people several people in their 30s. We have anybody in their 20s anymore. But we've got lots of people in their 30s, 40s. We got some elders. So age diverse, geographically diverse. And I say, for me, what is the best for last? We've got more women than men. Right? 7 women, 5 men. And when I said the best for last, 12 people. You are looking at the only white man on the national leadership team.
Racism.
Sorry?
just kidding, racism myself.
It's a good joke.
We try not to
Right. But I'm just pointing out that that didn't just happen. It was because we made an intentional, deliberate decision about how we cultivate leadership and how we roll together. And that we're trying to replicate that in all of our work. So at this point, I know that you called for it, but it felt like the conversation went away. Daniel called. Is there anybody who wants, like, nobody has to do a teach back. Daniel and I could just do it the next time. But is there anybody who feels comfortable enough to say, I'm ready to teach back, move to amend with Daniel and David as your training leaders?
Hey, Jill.
So we got Andre.
How you doing?
Yes, Jen. It needs to just stand in front of a group of people and say, here's what I understand move to amend to be about. And then you just sort of whatever.
I'm going to lose this. Hang on.
And again, Daniel and I will be here, and if there's any mistakes made, we'll jump in if you need some help from us. But we want to encourage people who want to present what you just heard. So I got Andre, who would like to do it. Is that correct? Right, so there's one. Anybody else? Okay, so
beginning with.
okay, cool. That's all good. And again, like Daniel and I are here, right? Like, so it's not like, okay, do move to amend. Like, do your best, and we'll collaborate together. Yes, okay.
I think Ted and I also want to change the system. You are also about changing the system, but you are promising only amendment to the existing constitution, whereas Ted and I
98% majority.
Then you are free to offer another. There's a place downstairs in the cafeteria. You can. There are open sessions if you can engage other people. I would ask for your respect that we organize this. This is like. And I hope that you felt that we were respectful of and listened to.
Okay, I helped out Occupy Sydney and Occupy Melbourne with their Occupy 6. And because Australia, no, I'm just helping them out with their Occupy 6. And then, yeah, and just to networking and stuff, they ended up becoming real friends. Well, once I started the March Against Monsanto with some gals, they were hip to it. And then Monsanto is getting kicked out of youth and they're turning into Australia. And they're moving to Australia, so they made me admins of March Against Monsanto City and March Against Monsanto Melbourne. And I'd like to get Bill Moyer over there.
Damn, that's great.
And they also made me admin of Stop Monsanto, which is going to be like the March Against Monsanto.
Yeah.
We're having a big march on October 12th in St. Louis at the world headquarters. Yeah, NSA and
You're going to be there?
yeah.
Let me know. Make sure I know. I want to make sure that I carve out enough time to drive down there. That's not too far. I get down there and back in a couple of days.
Yeah, and that's going to be a worldwide action. You know what the March Against Monsanto has cost Monsanto so far? Over $1.5 billion. Yes, $1.5 billion.
Hit somewhere I heard?
Yeah, I met Dr. Jill Stein the other day, and I said, hi, I'm Joe Hawk from Occupy Wall Street. She goes, what's your name again? I said, Joe Hawk. She goes, Joe, you helped change the world.
How about that?
Yeah. And I thought, well, that's pretty nice.
That's great. Hey, you know something? I was shaking hands with a guy over there from Occupy Tucson, and he says he's heard about Occupy Muskegon. He says he follows us on Facebook and stuff. We're pretty active.
Yeah, a lot of people have been saying that. A lot of people have been saying, hey, man, OM News is cool. What's up with that? How come that? It's like, well, where are you from? I'm from Occupy Little Rock. It's like, well, what?
Yeah, so they see us. Shit, we got to get you more involved again, man. And I'm sorry about all that shit that happened way back when.
Yeah, well, that happens. It's happened to every
I guess so, yeah.
group, yeah.
So we can still team up, right? I mean, we're still going.
Yeah, it's all, you're not going to totally agree with all the people all the time, but you just have to agree to disagree and then work on those issues that can go ahead and work on.
It's really good to see you.
Good to see you too, Dan.
Yep. Well, I'm going to flip this off, I think, Joe. Okay.